So after all the rumors, Kolten Wong is going to be a Seattle Mariner. Let's talk about the deal. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Friday, December 2nd, 2022. This is Tidy Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for an emergency episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you so much for making us your first listen after the Kolten Wong trade. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link as well as our social accounts is in the description below. So, according to Jeff Passan of ESPN, the Mariners have officially acquired second baseman Kolten Wong from the Milwaukee Brewers for Jesse Winker and Abraham Toro. There's also $1.75 million in cash heading over to the Mariners in this deal. So basically, the money being swapped is a wash. It's flat. So it's a draw. So that's an interesting aspect of this deal. We'll get into that a little bit. But yeah, we've heard the rumors for the last few weeks that the Mariners really liked Kolten Wong, that they were in on his market. There was a report last night from Kim Rosenthal that the Dodgers and Giants were also in on Wong, but it's the Mariners at the end of the day that come out with Wong. Wong had a $10 million club option that was picked up by the Brewers a few weeks ago, but that did not deter the Mariners from their pursuit of Wong, and they finally land him here, and they basically knock out two items on their to-do list with one deal, and that's also trading Jesse Winker, who was reportedly becoming a bit of a problem in the clubhouse amidst a stressful and struggle of a year for himself, in which he dealt with a couple of injuries, had to have some surgeries after the end of the season, had a rough season in the outfield, and was not really hitting for any sort of power. That trade just did not work out for the Mariners, at least from the Winker aspect of it. The Eugenio Suarez aspect, however, did work out pretty well for them. On top of that, they give up Abraham Toro here. Colby, what's your thoughts on this deal? What's your initial reaction?
Seattle Mariners are a better baseball team today than they were 30 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And that's really all I care about. The already complaining I'm seeing on Mariners social media is something. See yesterday's episode for that rant. No, the Mariners are a better baseball team today than they were yesterday. I mean, it's really that simple. Winker, like you said, he had become a bit of a distraction, a bit of a problem. Now here's the deal with Jesse. He's probably going to go and he's probably going to rake for Milwaukee. Like we've already addressed this when we talked about Jesse Winker. There's a good chance that you're probably going to trade him and he's going to go somewhere else and hit, because he's done it every other point in his career. But let's not forget, Jesse Winker is a terrible defender in left field. Not only were there issues with his, obviously his knee and his neck last year, there were some injury concerns there. There were also effort concerns. We had heard that they weren't thrilled with the amount of work he was putting into playing a good left field. They weren't thrilled with that. Jesse is a guy who Mariner fans love more than the front office does. I wish Jesse well. He seems like a great guy. I don't have any ill will towards Jesse Winker at all. He just wasn't a clubhouse fit. And sometimes you take that shot and it doesn't work. There's nothing in his past that would indicate that he wouldn't fit in this clubhouse. The Mariners just clearly did not want that to be a part of it. But let's also not pretend that Kolten Wong isn't kind of a comparable player to Jesse Winker. Like the Mariners didn't take less for Jesse Winker. Mm-hmm. They traded Kolten Wong, who also has a year left of club control, just like Jesse Winker. Wong plays up the middle at a position of need that the Mariners desperately need more than a DH/left fielder. He also crushes right-handed pitching in his career. He's a better base runner. And the Mariners are assuming, they're making the bet that he's a better clubhouse fit too. This is the second time we know the Mariners have been interested in Kolten Wong, and they had a really good shot of getting him the first time if Kevin Mather hadn't stepped in and pulled the rug out from under Jerry DiPoto and company. So Jerry clearly likes Kolten Wong. The Mariners front office clearly likes Kolten Wong. And when you kind of look at what this trade is, it's a rental for a rental, essentially, right? But the Mariners get the rental that's a better defender, plays up the middle, fills a position of need. And what it costs them is Abraham Toro. And I promise you this, The Mariners weren't thrilled about giving up Abraham Toro in this trade. The Mariners still really like Abraham Toro, but at the end of the day, are the Mariners like in such a bad spot that they can't replace Abraham Toro? No, they basically already did with Sam Haggerty. Like, so to me, Wong is just a better fit. Just straight at like, who's a better fit on this Mariners roster, Jesse Winker or Kolten Wong? All things considered, it's Kolten Wong, and I'm not sure that's close. So the Mariners are better. That's my initial reaction.
So there are a couple of concerns that I have, a lot of people have when it comes to Wong. First, what the hell happened to the defense last year? He was first percentile in outs above average after being basically a perennial Gold Glove candidate for many years, especially during his days in St. Louis. But along with that, he's had two of his best offensive seasons, including this past season when he posted a 116 WRC plus. Now, the thing is, uncharacteristically, he was awful against left-handed pitching. 138 average, and let's see what that was in WRC plus. It was a 37 WRC plus, but career-wise, he's actually been pretty good against both sides of the plate. 254 career average against lefties, but that's also an 80 WRC plus when you break it down further. But still, that's not like he's not completely utterly useless against lefties. The other thing too, and well, I guess part of this goes into the whole defensive conversation. This comes from Jason A. Churchill, friend of the show, at Prospect Insider on Twitter. He said, quote, "When I asked, I was told Kolten Wong just didn't move as easily and freely in the field in 2022 as in prior years, and he did have a few minor dings he dealt with for some of the year. So maybe some of it is injury, but this is going to be a big test. This is going to be a big project for Perry Hill to get Kolten Wong right, because now second base defense is all the more important with the ban of the shift. You're going to have to cover a lot more ground as a second baseman. So that's really my big concern, is how does he fit defensively? Because you do mention that he is a better defender and helps at a better or a more important position than Winker does. But I mean, outs above average suggests that Kolten Wong was one of the worst defenders in all of baseball this past season. So how much are they able to fix him, if at all? And how much should we be worried about that, Colby?
I'm not. Here's the deal with defensive metrics, right? When you look at them in an isolated 1-year sample size, they can tell you anything you want to say, right? So you look at Kolten Wong in 2022 and you say, hey, he was one of the worst second basemen in baseball. He's a bad defender now. Or you could look at it and say, well, it's a 1-year sample, so like maybe it didn't mean anything, right? It works both ways. I'm not concerned at all, because when I look at the overall track record of Kolten Wong, I see a guy who is at least an average second baseman. At the very least, he's average. Adam Frazier last year was not average. Adam Frazier was mediocre at best. So I don't see this as a big deal. I'm really not concerned about the defense at all. I trust Churchill when he says there are a lot of little nagging injuries that can add up. We saw it with J.P. Crawford, right? J.P. Crawford didn't have as good of a year defensively. Why? Well, he had a pec issue, he had a knee issue, he had an ankle issue. These things pop up, and they're going to pop up, for a guy like Kolten Wong too. He's 32 years old. But the guy has traditionally been a very good second baseman defensively. So why am I going to just only value 2022 and not 2021 and 2020 and 2019? Obviously, you weigh them differently, right? Because 2022 just happened. So you put a little more weight on that. But I am not the guy who believes that a guy goes from good to terrible in one off season or one season without there being some obvious answer to it, like nagging injuries. So to me, I'm not concerned. I think that Wong is going to be an upgrade over Adam Frazier defensively. I think he's probably going to be at least an average second baseman. I'm not really concerned about his defense, to be honest with you. We'll see what it looks like. It's certainly something that can be an issue, but it's also worth remembering, and we'll get to this a little bit later, the Mariners are also kind of protected in this sense because they have Dylan Moore and because they have Sam Haggerty, both of whom can play second base, and both of whom are actually really good platoon partners with Kolten Wong. So I'm not worried about the defense all that much.
Yeah, so let's talk about that more in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. You're listening to an emergency episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Now, folks, we did record Fan Fiction Friday, and we saw this trade around the 38 minute mark. So that episode will come out eventually. I don't know if it's going to be today, might be tomorrow, but we will drop that episode still. And it was a lot of fun to do that episode. I thought that was a pretty good episode of Fan Fiction Friday. So let's get back into this Kolten Wong deal, though. So you mentioned it. Dylan Moore, Sam Haggerty, possible platoon options with Kolten Wong, probably more so than Haggerty, because it seemed like they just wanted to avoid Haggerty playing in the infield whatsoever this past season. It seems like he's mostly just a corner outfielder now, and that's just his role, which is fine because he's pretty good at it. But this was also mentioned, I think it was Rosenthal who was the one that mentioned this, that the Mariners are, or maybe it was Bowden. Was it Bowden? Maybe it was Bowden, who said that the Mariners are interested in pairing someone with Dylan Moore at second base. So do you think that's the plan here?
Yep. I think more or less. Now, here's the deal. As you mentioned, Wong was terrible against lefties this last year. Mm-hmm. But in the past, he's been, okay.
High average, low WRC plus.
Right. He's a slap hitter against lefties, and power is relatively new to Wong's game in general anyways. But yeah, I do think the plan is if a lefty is on the mound, Dylan Moore is probably playing second base. I would say 90% of the time. Obviously, there's going to be days where you need Dylan Moore to play left field, so you just suck it up. Kolten Wong is going to have to face a lefty. Like, that's going to happen, right? But I do think the plan overall is that against right-handed pitching, Wong is going to hit somewhere 1 through 5 would be my guess, and versus left-handed pitching, Dylan Moore will be the guy who gets a bulk of those at bats. That would be my assumption. Yeah.
So you're the local Dylan Moore hater. So how do you feel about Dylan Moore kind of being a starter in the Mariners offense?
Well, first of all, I'll roll the tapes back to 2020. Big Dylan Moore supporter here, but it's Dylan. Here's the deal: he's not a starter. He's gonna start 30% of the games. That's about what the breakdown is, and that's if he starts every single game against the lefty. And at 30%, you're fine, especially against left-handed pitching. If you pick the spots in which you use Dylan Moore, he is a useful major leaguer. He is. There's no denying that. He's got power. He's got bat speed. He steals bases. He's a good defender. He can play multiple positions. If you pick your spots, you're fine. You can absolutely make a platoon with Dylan Moore work, as long as Dylan Moore is the low side of the platoon, right? If Dylan Moore was a lefty who crushed righties, well, he'd probably be an everyday player, but he's not. So I'm fine with it. I think it's totally fine. I think it's smart when you look at where the shortstop market is and where it's likely headed. I think going out and getting a second baseman who you already have the perfect counterpart for, it makes a lot of sense. It's good. It's good roster building is what it is.
All right, so Wong's making $10 million on his club option. Jesse Winker is making 8.5, I believe. Toro's making the league minimum. Yep. There's $1.75 million included here that's going to the Mariners in the steal from the Brewers. That basically just levels out all the money that's changing hands here. So I'm going to ask you, Colby, are the Mariners trying to save money? Are they trying to conserve money? Is this for a reason?
No. How can you say they're trying to save money when they're essentially did a salary swap? Like, what's the point? By the way, if they are, who cares? As long as they reinvest it. Like, why do you care? The Mariners did this trade and they saved $1 million. Or is it make it a bad trade? No, it doesn't. The cash changing hands doesn't matter to me at all. And honestly, it's a good thing if you're the Mariners, if you're a Mariner fan, because now theoretically you have more money to spend. And by the way, the Mariners just filled the biggest hole left on their roster and didn't spend a dime. So if you're a guy who's like, oh, well, they're just going to go get Kolten Wong and then use that as an excuse not to sign somebody else, what are you complaining about? They can't make that excuse now. Their payroll today is the same as it was yesterday. And yet they don't have to go out and figure out what to do at second base. So now all of a sudden, outfield and starting pitching, their two biggest needs, they have the same amount of money to spend on that as they did yesterday. What's the problem? with having $1.75 million added into this deal? There isn't one. There's no problem. It's a made up issue. It is. The money doesn't matter. Period.
Okay. So outfield. The Mariners now have even a bigger need in left field and DH if they want to have DH.
Do they?
In terms of bodies, at least. In terms of bodies.
It's interesting, at the end of last year, we're like, Jesse Winker doesn't even need to be on the playoff roster. And now 3 months later, we're like, oh my God, how will they survive without Jesse Winker? I think they'll be okay.
I wasn't necessarily doing that, but
of course you were.
But they did lose a body, an option there, right?
Barely.
And for the DH role as well, which who knows?
Jared Kelnick's better.
Who knows what they want to do with? Okay,
right.
So where do they go from now? That's the big question, right? They didn't spend any money on this deal, so therefore they have everything at their disposal still. Brandon Nimmo is still out there. We know that they had interest in him at the start of free agency, at least. But it did kind of seem like his market was growing to a point that maybe they didn't want to go to. But there's also the likes of Andrew Benintendi out there. There's some other names. There's also still trade options too. We've talked about Max Kepler. Maybe Max Kepler is still an option for them. But I know a lot of people now are going to shift their focus to Nimmo. Nimmo's now priority number one for a lot of Mariners fans, I would think. And some out there who think that Aaron Judge is a possibility. He's not, guys. He's not, guys. But yeah, so
put down the bottle.
So Nimmo's probably the guy. But also, I think the interesting thing here is, what do the Mariners do at DH? So what do you think? Because now Carlos Santana's in Pittsburgh. Winker's gone. He was the other possible DH option. We know that they prefer to just rotate guys through there, but they've been open to having a guy play DH, or at least having a couple guys that mostly rotate through there. So is Mitch Haniger on the table? What do you think their plan is from here on out to fill out the rest of their roles?
Side note, bit of a bummer here, but Chris Martin is signed with the Red Sox, so that's one relief option not happening. But in terms of left field DH, I think one thing they might try is, I think they're going to be heavily involved in the Yoshida market. Yoshida is not a very good left fielder, but we know the Mariners don't care about outfield defense. They had Mitch Haniger and Jesse Winker out there at the same time, way too much to pretend that they do. So Yoshida is a guy I think is interesting. And then I think what they might do is, I think they might try to answer their left field DH spot with two guys. Yoshida, primary DH, plays the outfield once or twice a week. And then they give Jared Kelnick a shot in left field, but they back that up with somebody like Will Myers, who crushes left-handed pitching, is a pretty good defender out there. So I think if you go out and you get Will Myers and Yoshida, I think you have a really good lineup. And yes, it's not ideal to sit and hope Jared Kelnick hits righties, but you know what? If he doesn't, Will Myers hits righties more than well enough to be your everyday left fielder as you look for a solution. And as we know, finding a corner outfielder at the trade deadline, not that hard.
Yeah, but let's do better than that suggestion. let's do better than that.
Why? If Jared Kelnick is hitting eighth against right-handed pitching for the first month, is that devastating?
Yeah, kind of. To me, it is.
It's not.
To me, it is. I would rather.
Well, you're an idiot. I don't know.
Wow.
But no, I get it. But look, again, it's about finding right. It's about what you can do with your resources.
Sure.
So, who's out there that you just take Nimmo off the board, right? Who's an everyday left fielder that carries more upside than Jared Kelnick? Probably isn't one. Now there's floor, right?
I mean, certainty, and I mean, there's all-star upside in someone like Andrew Benintendi, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Benintendi, fine, but I'd rather just spend the money on Nimmo at that point.
Yeah.
To me, Benintendi is just he's just a dude, more or less. He's a pretty good player.
He's a guy, but we've talked about how much he's a Jerry guy, right? He makes a lot of sense for the mold that Jerry wants, and also I think there's a bit more power in there than he's displayed so far, and he's a good defender.
And yet we never even heard Benintendi
has he even
connected to the Mariners at all.
Has he been linked to anyone? Now that I think
Not
about
a
it,
lot.
I can't even
Not a
remember
lot.
like a single rumor with him this offseason, which is weird because he had a lot of interest at the deadline.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised
But
he's
like,
just not a Blue Jay
do
right now.
you want to give Benintendi like 4-60 and essentially lock out Jared Kelnick forever? Or do you
True.
want to go Kelnick and then just Will Myers for 1-8 and just kind of be like, yeah, well, if
But
Kelnick
also
doesn't hit this year, we're out.
but the thing
If he
too is like
does,
Teoscar is only on a 1 year deal. We don't know if they're going to
yeah,
extend him. So there's going to be more opportunities down the road, at
right.
least
It's
right
not
now, for
ideal,
Kelnick to get involved.
right? But how do you know if Kelnick is going to be that guy if you don't give him at bats? You can't give him at bats at AAA. That's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Like AAA at bats mean nothing. So
Yeah.
unless the Mariners are ready to give up on Jared Kelnick, I think it makes sense to kind of protect yourself and have him go ahead and be your opening day left fielder, or at least compete for it. But you have to have. Here's the deal: you can't just go out and sign somebody who just hits right. Like you can't go get a Dylan Moore, right?
Right.
Like a very similar player to Dylan Moore, and be like, well, if Kelnick doesn't hit, I guess Dylan Moore is our left fielder. No, you have to go get somebody like AJ Pollock. You have to go get somebody like Will Myers, even somebody like Trey Mancini. You have to have a major league hitter
Mm-hmm.
as part of your platoon with Jared Kelnick or the DH rotation, right?
Yeah.
So I think Yoshida and like Will Myers makes a lot of sense. That's probably the way I would go. I don't know what Yoshida's market is. Nobody seems to be able to nail that down in terms of what he's going to cost. So there is a possibility that, Seattle, well, we can't get Yoshida, so let's just, let's go trade for Max Kepler, who's a guy Ty and I still really like, and I still think really fits on this roster. So there are going to be options. Do they maybe go, just go get defense and go get Kevin Kiermaier? There's some other interesting guys out there. So the guy got traded to the Mets that we've talked about the last few off seasons. Naquin. You can maybe try that. Tommy Pham's out there. Like there's some guys out there that you can sign. And I think the door is closed on Mitch Haniger. I don't think he's an option, particularly if the rumors about him getting 3 years are true. Like
3
I'm
years,
done with
$15
that.
million
Yeah.
AAV. Yeah. That's a bit much.
No chance. So yeah.
All right. So this, barring a trade of like JP Crawford out of nowhere, closes the door on the shortstop market officially. Unless
it was probably never open. Let's just be fair about that.
Yeah. So just what are your thoughts on that? Not landing one of the shortstops, not giving a deal like that, whatever it's going to end up costing, because we still don't know. None of these guys have signed, so we don't know what it's actually going to cost to land them, and we don't know who's actually going to be able to land them. Because is it another situation like with the Rangers where it's just going to be a bottom of the barrel team that is willing to spend an exorbitant more amount of money than any other, any contender that might be in on their market? Like we don't know what that market is looking like, but kind of having a general idea, being in the ballpark at least in terms of what that would cost, what that would take to land one of those guys. How do you feel about not doing that and going with Wong instead, he's a stopgap right now. That's all he is at the moment. They're going to have to address this situation again next winter, whether it's keeping Wong or going elsewhere with it. So what do you think about going this route instead of somewhere else?
I'm totally fine with it. Like, would I like Carlos Correa to be a Seattle Mariner? Sure. That'd be fun. Trey Turner, yeah, cool. That'd be awesome. But here's the deal, right? We don't operate in a vacuum. The Mariners don't operate in a vacuum. They have a 26-man roster they need to think about, and they can't just think about one 26-man roster at a time. We talked about this yesterday. They have to be looking ahead, and that's what they're doing. So if the Mariners come and they say, hey, look, this is the number we think we can do long-term on a 7, 8, 9-year deal for one of the shortstops, and the shortstop says no, the Mariners can't be so desperate that they completely abandon their plan. The plan is working. It has worked. It will continue to work. Discipline is the shortcut. So when you look at it, this would be the equivalent or pretty close to the Mariners going out and giving Robinson Cano $70 million more to get him to come here. It doesn't work. That type of thing doesn't work. There is a limit. You cannot just go out and write blank check after blank check to these guys and just say, all right, now we'll put together a team around them. That's not how it works. Everybody has to fit. Do you want to be the Angels? Do you want to be the Rangers? I don't. I'd much rather be where I am. So as much as I want a player like Trey Turner, would be amazing. It would be so fun to have Trey Turner be a Mariner. Why am I going to write a $300 million check to a guy who I think is only worth $220 million to create some buzz around the ballpark? There's already buzz with the Seattle Mariners. I don't need to create that. You know who needed to create buzz? The 2014 Seattle Mariners. That's why they went out and they got Robinson Cano, because that franchise was dead. Nobody cared about it. People care about this franchise now. I don't need to be desperate. I don't need to spend money to create buzz. I put out a good product last year. I'm going to put out a good product this year. I don't need that player unless it's at my price. I think that's a good sign. And I think the Mariners deserve some credit for being disciplined enough not to chase the shiny toy and look at it and say, we need to fix our roster, right? And we don't need to go out and sign this player at all cost and ignore the rest of our roster. We're not going to go give Xander Bogaerts $28 million and then just be like, oh, well, here's, Miguel Rojas at second base and we're good. Like, no, the Mariners are going at this at the right, I think at the right strategy where they're building this team so that the lineup 1 through 9 is as good as it can be. And the roster 1 through 26 is as good as it can be. So yes, I want the Mariners to go out and get Trey Turner. That would have been amazing. I don't want the Mariners to spend $320 million on Trey Turner if they're only comfortable giving him $230. I trust them in that sense. And you should too. It's really not brain surgery. It's not hard to see what the Mariners are trying to do. It's really not. And I think it's the way that you kind of have to work if you're the Seattle Mariners, because again, you're not going to be the Mets. You're not going to go push the luxury tax every single year. And you want to sit here and say they should, that's fine. But that's not the conversation we're having, because we know they're not. It is a waste of everybody's time. So yes, again, I would love it if the Seattle Mariners, it would be so much fun if the Mariners went out and signed Xander Bogaerts, right? It'd also be incredible content for us. So selfishly, yeah, I wouldn't mind that either. But you don't do that for whatever cost. There's a jumping off point where you say we're out, and the Mariners found it. Like, do you think the Mariners really knew, the Mariners just did this without knowing for sure what it would cost them to even be in the conversation for any of those shortstops? Of course they didn't. They knew exactly what the number was going to be, and they just weren't comfortable doing it. So they pivot. They pivoted quickly. It's crazy. We're less than a month into the offseason. The Mariners have already fixed their 2 biggest holes, or they've addressed them at least. What are you complaining about?
So a couple things that I want to mention here before we hop off. An underrated aspect of adding Wong is his value on the base pass. He was 17 of 23 in stolen base attempts and graded out as a plus 3.4 on Fangraph's base running metric, which is really good. And, the Mariners this past season were a fundamentally sound team. They ran the bases well for the most part. They don't have the upside to, get that extra base. They didn't have that speed to, go grind out that extra base or get that key steal that they would need in certain situations, stuff like that. So Wong adds a little bit of that. So that's nice to have. The other thing too, I was looking at his hard hit rates, and he had a career high in hard hit rate this past season. 35.2% of the time he registered a hard hit, which is 95 miles per hour or harder. He also had a 5.4% barrel rate, which is the second highest of his career. And he was hitting for more power. So that showed through in his power numbers as well. He hit 14 home runs last season, 2021, which was his career high before he beat that with 15 home runs this past season. So he can also hit for a bit of power. He can hit for certainly more power than Adam Frazier can. So you've added that. You've added a bit more stolen base potential than Frazier. The defense is still the thing that's up in the air, because I personally still don't know exactly what went wrong there. But the good news is the Mariners have Perry Hill, who is a defensive wizard. So again, this is going to be a big project for him in fixing Kolten Wong, because if they can, and he is providing the offense that he is on top of some pretty good defense. Now, I don't think he's going to get back to Gold Glove caliber, but if he can just be an average defensive second baseman with the offense that he's providing, at least against right-handed pitching, which is predominantly the most pitching that you're going to see over the course of a season, the most common pitching that you're going to see over the course of a season, then this is a great addition. But there are some question marks with this. So I'm going to be interested to see how this plays out. It's a little bit of a gamble for the Mariners in the sense that they are going to have to address the spot again in a year's time. But we'll worry about that when we get to it, and we'll see what they're able to do
Ty,
here
you're
with
so
Wong.
negative.
I'm so
You're
negative.
so negative.
I'm so negative.
Like he's out here raining on people's parade.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people right now are very excited about acquiring Kolten Wong.
They should be. The Mariners got better today.
It is a good move. It is
that
a good
is
move.
the end of the story.
It's not the move that everyone wanted, but it is still
I
a
don't
good
care
move.
what everyone wants. I want the team to get better. The team got better. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
end of the story. That's the end of the podcast. No more. No qualifiers from you. Are the Mariners a better team today than they were an hour ago?
Yes. There you go.
That's the end of the discussion. Good trade.
That's going to do it for our show.
Goodbye.
That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On
Whiny
Mariners.
bunch of babies.
Oh, my God.
That's not exactly what I wanted to happen. I'm so mad. They got better. Anyways, back to you, Ty.
All right. So that was a thing that just happened. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez. It's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen after the Kolten Wong trade. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast featuring the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next week. Peace.